Happy New Year to you. Now, if you're anything like me, I've spent the last couple of weeks going through what I accomplished during the year and didn't accomplish. I'm a very ambitious person. And sometime around December 1st, I start hating myself. Does anybody else do that? And then by the time, about a week before Christmas, I start hating everybody around me. And then the new year ends, and then I have to get my composure, and I always say I've made too many goals, and I'm too ambitious, and I've got to focus more. And then I start making my plans for the year. And hopefully you're thinking about what you want to accomplish for the year. Now, I want to start out with a very simple question. What if you got everything you wanted the day you graduated from high school? Just think about that for a minute. Oh, come on. The pretty girl, the handsome boy, the hot car, the job, being the disco guy at your favorite, the disc jockey at your favorite club, all that stuff. Would your life be meaningful? Oh, you might be happy for a while, I'll give you that. Would you actually be growing? Now, what's interesting is that our lives are works in progress. I like that Bernard Mailloux famous novel, The Natural, which, of course, there's the famous Robert Redford film, where Roy Hobbs, the great hitter, is laying in the hospital bed, and Iris Gaines, his childhood sweetheart, comes in, and she says, Roy, I think we have two lives, the life we learn with and the life we live with. Well, I would add to that, I think we have multiple lives. We are versions of ourselves. We're version 1, version 2, version 3, version 4. And part of that has to do with what pulls us forward. Now, I use the term creativize as a neologism. It's a made-up term. And it means adding creativity to the ordinary things that we do in life, right? Adding creativity to the ordinary things. That's what we do every year. That's what we do with our New Year's resolutions. And creativizing is the activity of actually the process of doing this. And creativizers are people who do this on a regular basis. So every year, we kind of go through this cycle where we're actually sort of intentional about this. But there's more to being an innovator than just having a creative mindset. And I think one of the things that people get wrong is what's really required to do this. So I'm going to start out by saying I think there are 8 underlying rules that all of us have to admit to. They're almost existential at the beginning of the year when we make our New Year's resolutions. Because if we don't engage these rules, our resolutions never come true. So these are sort of guidelines. And I'd like to start out with one of my favorite quotes from Emerson. Man is a piece of the universe made alive. Now, when I grew up in the great state of Michigan that's surrounded by 90% of all the fresh water in the United States. We have more shoreline than the entire East Coast put together. So if you live in Michigan, everybody lives on water. Granted, it's frozen a third of the year, but we all live on water. So my grandfather was a Hungarian immigrant, and we would go fishing with him all the time. And one of the amazing things is when he'd take us out, he would show us how nature was alive. The fish were alive, and the clouds were alive, and the trees were alive, and everything around us was alive. And what he was trying to show us is that we are not the center of the universe, that everything around us that's moving is pursuing power, progeny, or pleasure. The world is growing. And the object is, can we grow with the world? So the first sort of rule, or the first guideline, is very simple. We are beings in the world trying to transcend it. The great philosopher Martin Heidegger coined the term beings in the world. And he said, the problem with philosophy is we think we're gods looking down on the world. But we're actually encased in all kinds of challenges in the world. And we are having to respond and draw on this world. Now, in a wonderful book by Teilhard de Chardin, the great Jesuit philosopher of the last century, his big thing was that we are all in an act of becoming. But one of the challenges that we all have about trying to transcend the world is that even though we have this great capacity as human beings, the only way in which we can actually transcend the world is by the process of creativity. It is the reason that we create. Now, don't say that man is the only animal that creates. That's simply not true. Chimpanzees create, dolphins create, Chaldean crows create. But man is the only animal that knows and knows he knows. Putting it another way, ladies and gentlemen, no one gets out of here alive. That is the existential condition. And that is the reason that we create. And what makes us unusual is we're able to share this with other human beings. In fact, the great Alabaman, a Harvard professor, if you know E.O. Wilson's work, talks about what distinguishes human beings from everyone else in the world is our ability and our capacity to translate imagination into language and to share that. This is how we build cities. This is how we build airplanes. This is how we build civilizations. Rule number 2, everything is both part of a greater system and a whole thing unto itself. Immanuel Kant's great work, right? The critique of pure reason. Now, what Kant was saying is that all of us have this fundamental belief that somehow we're unique or individual. Now, I had this happen to me a few years back. I was at Torrey Pines in San Diego, and there's a very famous statue there called the Self-Made Man. And it's a person kind of carving himself out of rock. So think of Michelangelo, pulling himself as an orthogonal twist out of a piece of marble. And what was interesting to me is when I first saw it, I fell into the same trap we all fall into. I said to myself, I'm a self-made man. I grew up in a HUD house. I have 1 million brothers and sisters. I came to college as a wrestler. Nobody thought I was going to do anything. I worked all the time, and I became someone. And you ever have that moment where you're like, I did it? And then you start thinking through carefully, and what do you start thinking about? The teacher who saw something in you, the coach who wrote a letter for you, the guy who didn't need to give you a Teamster job but gave you a Teamster job, the person who took you into the doctoral program but didn't need to take you into the doctoral program. And what do you figure out immediately? No one in here is self-made. I don't care where you came from. You were not made individually. Now, every year around this time, I fall into this trap, and I'm guessing you do too. I read a self-help book over Christmas. I love self-help books. I'm addicted to them, even though most of them are terrible. And I start out, this is Santa Claus. I love Santa. He's my hero, Santa Claus. And I start out by saying, you know what I'm doing next year? I've worked really hard, and I just turned 60 years old, and I've made a little money, I've done okay, I'm going to quit it all, and I'm going to move up north, and I'm going to write a crappy fantasy book. That's what I'm doing. I've had enough of the bureaucracy. How many are with me? You've had enough of the bureaucracy? You had enough? I've had enough. I'm mad as hell, and I'm not taking it anymore. Yeah, you read the book too, right? I'm reading that book. I'm self-authorizing all the things I'm supposed to be. Except there's a problem. And that is my nesting doll fits inside, guess what? Another nesting doll. A bigger Santa Claus. Who's in this Santa Claus? Well, my wife Stanny is in this Santa Claus. What does she think about me taking the year off? If she likes it, I probably have a big problem at home, right? My dean at my school, my business partners, the people at NPR in charge of my radio program, they probably are not thrilled with me moving up north and writing a crappy fantasy novel. Now, on top of that is what? There's another Santa Claus. And this Santa Claus is called reality. There's a financial crisis. Yeah, you think about it. We had a 10-year run, guys. I used to be an advisor to the Federal Reserve. These things don't go on forever. Don't kid yourself, right? There's a pandemic. Somebody decides to attack. There's a war. It's what you guys are all about. Yeah, that Santa Claus is bigger than the communal Santa Claus. Now, here's the point. Innovation and creativity is not created through freedom. It's created through constraints. It's the workaround. It's what do we do? Right? It's the person's, oh, there's a terrible bureaucracy. It's so bad, nobody can get anything done until you see what? Somebody get it done. Then what do? Cheater, pumpkin eater. No! It's a person who's figured out how to be creative in a functionally restrictive environment. So the second rule, you're not self-created. You're not alone. We are both creating and created. Anything that you've become in life has been a group project. And consider yourself lucky. Somebody cared about you enough, or something happened to you that turned out pretty well. Now, this is my favorite quote of all time. And it's wonderful we have a Cambridge professor here. This was a Cambridge philosopher, a famous one named Bertrand Russell, won the Nobel Prize. The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, but wiser people so full of doubts. Oh my word. How you create is what you create. One of my favorite stories is I did something radical when I was a very young man. I was 25 years old, I had a PhD, I was a presidential scholar. So certainly I was going to go to an Ivy League school or do that. You know what I did? I went to work for a man with a $20 million pizza company. 5 years and $5 billion later, it was Domino's Pizza. I could hear the people at PepsiCo and Pizza Hut think they were dull, drab, and awful. And it was a lot of fun building it. And you know why it was fun? Because everything that everybody else did was predictable. And what we did was different. Let me give you the big thing. You couldn't buy a Domino's Pizza franchise. I don't know if you know this. Back in the day when it was the fastest growing corporation in America, the 1980s, you had to go work for somebody who actually had a Domino's franchise and knew what they were doing. You had to be apprenticed. You had to learn to be a creative person. Just like the old guilds of Europe, you had to learn to be a goldsmith, right? And we gave you your first store, and no one knew what hit them. And what was even more interesting is people didn't know whether that was a real progressive thing or a real conservative thing to do, as if that ever even mattered. Another example of this, when I was at Domino's, I was brought into a group called AIS, Applied Integrated Systems. Those of you who are youngsters, there was a day before the internet. And I happened to be an advisor to Apple when Steve Jobs was being pushed out the first time. And Apple had a problem. Apple couldn't create enough software to compete with Microsoft and IBM. So what did we do? We created an internal system called AppleNet, which became something called Connect, which became something called iTunes. And what it was a way to connect seekers and solvers. It was a way to engage a larger federation, a group of people, in order to create software, in order to compete with other corporations. The notion was, even though these other businesses were in different businesses, they didn't create the same way. The notion is, are you willing to change the playbook? And in order to do that, you have to change the way you think about things. Even if you were to be your best self, if you were to try to use the bureaucracy to create radical innovation, what you would create is quality and efficiency at scale, and you would inadvertently destroy your forward position. And I'll talk about this later. So how you do something is what you do. And here it is, New Year's, a great example. Oh, I'm going to lose weight. How are you going to do it? I'm doing the secret diet. Oh, how's that going to work? I'm eating kale for 3 meals a day. First of all, 1 meal is enough, right? It tastes like an ashtray. It's terrible stuff, right? You know, in order to lose weight, you got to do what? You got to build it into your lifestyle. You got to go to the gym. You got to eat slightly differently. How you create is what you create. Lesson 4. If you do not change direction, you may end up where you're heading. Now, it's interesting to me that people think they're going to be creative without ever practicing. You ever notice that? Now, I can tell in this room, everybody, if you took out a piece of paper and drew a picture of your spouse, I could tell you at what age you stopped learning to draw. Speak a foreign language, play an instrument. It doesn't matter whether you're 8 or 80, you're going to go through the failure cycle. You ever wonder why venture capitalists give a lot of A-round money to a lot of different people? Right? What I'm doing is I'm giving you all $10,000 for the same disease state. Why am I doing that? It seems wasteful, doesn't it? But what I'm doing is I'm accelerating the failure cycle, and all these folks down here, they get something promising. You look like pathetic losers, but it turns out you were winners. So what I'm doing now is I'm doubling down in B round, and I'm giving you guys 10 times that amount of money. And it turns out that our folks in the front row here, who would have ever guessed it? It turns out that there are big winners, and they're going to get my IPO. The Templeton Foundation study, 1% of 1% made 89% of all the capital gains. That's where the 1% on Wall Street number came from. The rich got richer. Why? Because they understood that you cannot avoid the failure cycle. You can only accelerate it. You know what a loser is? A loser is somebody who goes, go big or go home. Oh, I loved the recession. All those arrogant bastards went home. Goodbye. Real innovators hedge. You want to see the greatest movie ever made on innovation? Watch the movie Moneyball. Watch it over and over and over again. And don't forget the first 6 weeks they wanted the fire Billy Bean, right? Don't forget it. And don't forget he didn't win the playoffs. Why? Because he stopped shuffling the lineup. It's always version 1, version 2, version 3. Can I move the runners along? And where am I getting momentum? So where in your yearly plan are you going to fail? Where is that in your plan? Or is your plan effortless superiority? That's my favorite. I'm effortless superior. It's all going to work. The other one that really bothers me, and I see this sometimes in the military, feigning humility. Feigning it, acting the part, being a poser. The issue is, if you really have humility, you don't believe everything works. You believe some things go kaboom. Hope I didn't hurt anybody, right? Number 5, every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. You know, one of the things that I find particularly bothersome these days is what's happened with social media. There's a term for this called confirmation bias. Have you ever noticed that all the people on your social media page who call other people stupid, you ever seen that happen? You ever notice they're the stupidest people on your page? You know why? There's a term for it called the Dunning-Kruger effect. It means they're not very self-aware. And what happens in social media, what's called microsegmenting. So this is a marketing trick. You're playing right into it. We're knowing what you're going to do next. What happens if somebody on your social media page doesn't believe all the same crap you believe? Doesn't listen to the same alt band, doesn't go to the same church, doesn't have the same political views? What do? You unfriend them. The Spanish Inquisition couldn't have thought of that. On a dark night, on a dark road, people disappear. I've spent my life studying what are called creativity clusters. Why groups have creativity? I live in this little town called Ann Arbor, Michigan, 116,000 people, has $2.8 billion in venture capital. We have the most venture capital per person than any city on the planet right now. Why is Ann Arbor any different than any other city up north? And it's very simple. You walk through the town and what do you see? You see all the different races. You see all the different occupations. You hear all the different languages. And the same is true for the 30 other places on the planet that produce almost all the intellectual property. What is it about diversity that produces innovation? It's simple. When people don't come from the same place and they don't think the same way, what do you get? Conflict. Innovation is the result of the creative power of constructive conflict. On your social media page, if you never meet the loyal opposition, you continue down your blind spot road. You only see one thing. You become dumber and dumber and dumber. You become Dunning-Kruger. Spread it out. Reach out. If you're straight, read The Advocate. If you're white, read Ebony. Expand your mind. Engage in the other. If you're a Democrat, watch Fox. If you're a Republican, watch MSNBC. You'll live, okay? Because innovation is not the result of compromise. I'm not talking about compromise. I'm talking about a third way. I'm talking about Hegelian logic. I'm talking about Taoist philosophy. I'm talking about when two things that don't agree are meeting in a way that's respectful. You create a third way, a better way, a new way. In my opinion, the American way. That's what we're about. That's our unique strength. Right? This is the great experiment. Everyone is from someplace. It's not just a moral issue, it's an economic issue. 6, my favorite philosopher, John Dewey. I built the Innovatrium, the original Innovation Institute, across the street from the original Dewey School. That's right, you guys from Chicago. The original Dewey School is in Ann Arbor. Thank you very much. Look it up. Now, the self is not something ready-made, but something in continuous formation through choice of action. It's an act of volition. You don't just wake up one day. You have to decide you're going to create yourself. That's what New Year is about. That's what building this is about. But here's the thing. Everything costs something. Whoever tells you different is trying to sell you something or sleep with you, one or the other. You know, you're okay with that. I got it. All right. Now, I'm coming back from Miami the other day, and this lady sitting next to me says, well, you know, she wants to chat. Okay, I'm going to chat. I'm a nice guy. And she says, what do you do? And I write a lot of books and do a lot of things. She said, I'm writing a book. I said, oh, and I'm trying to, you try and be engaged even though you're really tired, just want to go home. Oh, really? Tell me about your book. Well, I'm a lawyer and I wrote this book and it's an intrigue book, it's a suspense book, and there's murder and mystery. And I said, oh, wow, that sounds amazing. Tell me a little bit about, have you got an agent? Oh, no, I haven't got an agent yet. Oh, do you need a recommendation or something? No, not yet. I said, oh, have you targeted a publisher? No. So, well, is your manuscript ready? She said, no, I don't really have a manuscript yet. I said, oh, what have you got? She said, I've got an outline. I said, oh, good. How long have you been working on the book? She said, about 15 years. Okay, now, just a fact check for a minute here. Is this woman ever going to write a book? No. You know it and I know it. And I asked her, what's stopping you from writing the book? I do Pilates, and I volunteer at the Humane Society. She's a really nice woman. I'm a lawyer, sometimes I have to work late. And what am I thinking as a writer? You think what? If you want to write a book, how do you write a book? You get your sorry ass out of bed every morning, and you write a bunch of pages, and what happens at the end of the day? You say, I'm never going to be a writer, I totally suck, this is terrible, I'm going to do it again tomorrow. It's a socially acceptable pathology. But here's the question for you. You want innovation? What are you willing to give up? If you give up nothing, you're still flying the old spacecraft, you're still doing it the old way, what's the likelihood you're ever going to write a book? Never. When do you have to start doing it? Now. Do you try and do it all in one fell swoop? That's what people do at the New Year. I'm going to go on a diet. It's all going to work. I'm going to do this really stringent thing. About 30 days in, what do we notice? You all fall down. Doesn't work. Why? You overplayed your hand. It's the guy you go golfing with who always thinks he's going to make it on the green with one shot. Good luck with that. Even Tiger Woods doesn't do it right anymore, right? So the notion is it's hard to do. What are you willing to give up? The next one, the only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence becomes an act of rebellion. Right? Are you willing to free yourself? I had a very interesting conversation. I've been married for a quarter of a century. But my wife made a comment one time, sort of in passing. She's from Indonesia. And she said, what really strikes me about America is that it's the freest country in the world. And this is how people see us. It's the freest, most opportune country in the world, and yet most people do the exact same thing. You ever notice that? You're slaves to the dominant logic of this culture. You all do the same things. You fill your head with the same stuff. Interestingly enough, I love the old Western movies that I think put this in a nice perspective. You remember the old John Wayne movies where Gabby Hayes or Walter Houston would ramble into camp? The cavalry ain't coming, the cavalry ain't coming. What did it mean? It means only a few things. Run, Forrest, run. Or I'm going to fight the man. That's my favorite. Millennials, this is my favorite. You guys, I'm going to fight the man. You haven't even seen the man. The man's going to put a can of whoop ass all over you. He's going to hit you upside the head. The man's going to whoop all over you. Good luck fighting the man. Even when you become the man, you're fighting the man. I don't know who the man is. I thought someday I'd get all my chevrons and I'd be the man. And even I'm not the man. There's another nesting doll on top of me. Yeah, you all want to be generals. You think you got to take crap. These guys up here have to take an incredible amount of crap. They can tell you what kind of wine goes with crap, right? That's what goes on. Yeah. The cavalry ain't coming. You want innovation in the Air Force? You want to recreate yourself? No one's going to save you. I'm sorry. They're not. No, it's just like here's the 10 secrets to attracting the, no. First, no. No one's ever going to save you. No marriage is going to make your life perfect. No job is going to make it all work for you. No. That's an existential moment. You have to figure this out yourself. You're free and responsible. I'm sorry, I didn't make up the world. I just live here like you. I'm a being in the world. Henry Bergson, the guy who kind of created psychology, Elan Vital, this guy. To exist is to change. To change is to mature. To mature is to go on creating oneself endlessly. I got a story I want to tell you. I was in Hartsfield in Atlanta the other day, and there's a guy screaming at the monitor, right? You ever been in Hartsfield? It's a crazy airport. So I had to go up to the guy. I'm like, what? I'm thinking something happened? You know, where are we being invaded? And he said, no, my representative, he's a flip-flopper. I said, well, what happened? My representative, where I'm from, my congressperson, was on a committee, and it was all about controlling this thing, and he read this report, and he changed his mind. He's a flip-flopper. And I said, I'm not understanding this. What happened? He was really an advocate for this one position, and then he read this report, and he changed his mind. And I looked at him, I said, isn't that what intelligent people do? I thought he was going to hit me. They're going to have a fight in the Atlanta airport. I'm not going to get home tonight. The guy's dominant logic was so strong that he was unwilling to adjust any of his positions because of what he believed.